Alright, let's get to the rest of the Radian Snowman. So far, we've got the first quadrant filled in real good. So let's move on to the second quadrant. Here we see we got 3 distinct points in the second quadrant that mirror the 3 important points in the first quadrant. They're going to represent 3 position angles. This one, the 60-degree angle, meaning that the angle that we make with the x-axis here is 60 degrees. However, this angle is not 60 degrees. It's going to be the 180 minus 60 degrees, or 120 degrees. So I'm going to make some room right here and label this point as my 120 degree angle. Moving on to the next point, that represents this 45 degree angle that's in the second quadrant, where the 45 degrees is our reference angle down here. However, again, our angle, the position angle, is not 45 degrees. It's going to be the 180 degrees minus 45 for a 135 degree angle. So again, let's make some room, clean it up, and label our point as 135 degrees. Finally, we have the last point on here, that being our 30 degree angle. And when our reference angle is 30 degrees, we're going to start at 180, back it up 30 degrees, so we're left with 150 degrees. So again, we'll label that as our 150 degree angle. When we want to turn these into radians, remember that pattern that's happening here. For instance, we have 30, 60, 90, or 1/6, 2/6, and 3/6 pies. As we continue to each of these, we're going to continue to add another 30 degrees, so another pi over 6. Like we said, 30 degrees is 1 pi over 6, 60 degrees is 2 pi over 6, 90 degrees is 3 pi over 6, 120 degrees is going to be 4 pi over 6, which is 2 pi over 3. And then adding another 30 degrees, another pi over 6, 4 pi over 6, plus a pi over 6 is 5 pi over 6. And if we were to continue, we would end up at 6 pi over 6, which is that pi that we see at the end. And when it comes to the 45 degree angles, here we have 1 pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, so this one must be 3 pi over 4 before we finish with 4 pi over 4, or that pi that's at the end. Now that we've identified all of our angle measures, we need to identify all of those points. And the wonderful thing about it is, for instance, this point, its reference angle was 60 degrees. So its values are going to match up with those coordinates on the 60 degree angle. So this ordered pair is going to be 1/2 square root of 3 over 2. However, we have to recognize that we are in the second quadrant, right? And this point is a point on the plane. So in order to get there, we have to go backwards 1/2 and then up root 3 over 2. That means the x-coordinate is going to be negative. Similarly, for the 135 degrees, or 3 pi over 4, its ordered pair is the same as the 45 degree angle, root 2 over 2 and root 2 over 2. However, because we're in the second quadrant, the x-coordinate is negative. And the same thing happens for our 150 degree angle, that being our 30 degree angle that's in the second quadrant. It's going to have the same coordinates as our 30 degree angle, so it'll be root 3 over 2 and 1/2, but of course our x-coordinate is going to be negative. As we continue to move around the unit circle, this pattern is going to continue in the same way. First, we need to identify all of our angles. So the first point is the 30 degree angle that is in the third quadrant. So if we added 30 degrees to 180, we're at 210 degrees. The next point is our 45 degree angle. So 180 plus 45 is 225 degrees. And the third point is our 60 degree angle. So 180 plus 60 degrees is 240 degrees. We need to write each of these in terms of their radian measure. And our 30 degrees are pi over 6s. So if we started with 1 pi, I'll write it down here, 1 pi, and we were to add pi over 6, that would mean we'd have to get common denominators, making this 7 pi over 6. And if we did the same thing with pi over 4, then we're going to start with pi and add pi over 4, getting common denominators. 4 pi over 4 plus 1 pi over 4 is 5 pi over 4. And same thing with our pi over 3 angle that is in the third quadrant. We're going to take pi and add pi over 3. So 3 pi over 3 plus pi over 3 leaves us with 4 pi over 3. Then, as far as each of the points are concerned, all of those ordered pairs are going to match. So for the 30 degree angle, it's going to be root 3 over 2 and 1/2. However, now we're in the third quadrant. To get into the third quadrant, we need to go back and down, meaning that the x-coordinate is negative and the y-coordinate is negative. So when we write the coordinates for our 45 degree angle, that 5 pi over 4, it's going to be negative root 2 over 2 and negative root 2 over 2. For the 240 degree angle, coordinates are the same, they're just both negative, so negative 1/2 and negative root 3 over 2. Before I move into the fourth quadrant, I see that I'm missing one angle here. This right angle that makes up the negative y-axis, that's going to be 270 degrees, which is 3 pi over 2. So let's finish this off by moving into the fourth quadrant. Now remember, it's not going to be the next point along the circle that's going to be our 30 degree or pi over 6 angle. Our 30 degree reference angle happens here, with this angle being 30 degrees. So we're going to take that 360 degrees and subtract our reference angle of 30 degrees to get an angle of 330 degrees. Then for our pi over 4 angle, our 45 degree angle, start with the 360 degrees, subtract 45 degrees, and we're left with 315 degrees. Last one, 360 minus the 60 degree angle would be, of course, 300. When it comes to those angles in radians, well, remember that, of course, we're going to start with 2 pi and subtract our reference angle. So starting with the pi over 6, 2 pi is really 12 pi over 6, minus 1 pi over 6 is 11 pi over 6. Then for the pi over 4, 2 pi, we'd have to multiply by 4 over 4 and subtract 4. So we're looking at 8 pi over 4 minus 1 pi over 4 is 7 pi over 4. And then do the same thing for our pi over 3 angle. So we're going to take pi over 3 away from 2 pi, so we get common denominators. 6 pi over 3 minus 1 pi over 3 is 5 pi over 3. Then, when it comes to our ordered pairs, they're going to match up. So our 30 degree angle is going to match up with the 30 degree angle that's up on top, that root 3 over 2, 1/2. So root 3 over 2 and 1/2. This time we're in the fourth quadrant. In the fourth quadrant, the x-coordinates are positive, but the y-coordinates are negative. So same thing for our 45 degree angle. We'll have root 2 over 2 and negative root 2 over 2. And for our 60 degree angle down here, that would be 1/2 and negative root 3 over 2. Once we have all of that filled in, now we have a completed unit circle. If you haven't already printed off your Radian Snowman and filled it in, do that now. All right, make your own Radian Snowman where you have all of your points that are labeled in terms of degrees and radians, as well as all of those ordered pairs. It's those ordered pairs that tell us the sine and cosine of our most important angles. Now that we have the entire unit circle filled in, we can find things like the cosine of 5 pi over 4. All we have to do is first find that 5 pi over 4 angle, which is right here. Look to its ordered pair, negative root 2 over 2 and negative root 2 over 2. The cosine is the x-coordinate, negative root 2 over 2. And if we wanted to find the sine of 5 pi over 3, find your 5 pi over 3 angle. The sine is going to be the y-coordinate, negative root 3 over 2. That's what I want you to get practice on. And your homework today is to use this Radian Snowman. So make sure you have one of your own.